The millionaire CEO was stuck in traffic, until he saw two little girls sleeping alone on an empty bus, and realized he couldn't just drive away. Oliver Harris had never been a man who tolerated delays. His days were managed with precision, his car routes optimized down to the minute, and his expectations rarely left room for the unpredictable. That morning began like any other, coffee in hand, briefcase by his side, and a quiet driver escorting him toward the downtown offices of Harris Group International. It was a crisp weekday, the kind that promised clarity and control, the kind Oliver liked best. He reviewed presentation notes from his tablet in the back seat of his black sedan, barely noticing the city streaming past the tinted windows. He had a meeting scheduled at exactly 9 a.m. with international investors and, as always, he planned to be 5 minutes early. But just 2 blocks from the final turn, the traffic halted completely. His driver leaned forward, murmuring something about a stalled bus. Oliver didn't respond right away. He didn't need to, his face had already tightened, his jaw clenched in quiet frustration. Minutes passed. The car didn't move. He checked his watch, then the screen again, and finally pushed the door open, stepping into the noise and confusion of a packed city street. Cars honked, pedestrians stood on the sidewalk with annoyed expressions, and in the distance, a city bus sat idling on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. Next to it stood the driver, alone, looking anxious and unsure. Oliver's shoes clicked against the pavement as he approached the man. "What's the problem?" he asked, his tone sharp but not aggressive. The driver recognized him instantly. Everyone in the city knew Oliver Harris, but seemed too flustered to care. "It's not mechanical," the driver explained quickly. "There are 2 little girls still inside. Twins, I think. They got on by mistake and then fell asleep. No one came for them. I don't know where they live, and they don't have any contact information. I called the office, but they said to wait for a response." Without thinking, Oliver turned and climbed onto the bus. It was empty, except for the 2 small figures curled up on the back bench seat. He stared for a long moment, unable to move. They were sleeping so peacefully, so completely unaware of the world's chaos around them. Their heads were tilted toward one another, their long, dark hair nearly identical, their backpacks tucked under their arms like pillows. Something about the sight shook him in a way he couldn't explain. These girls didn't look frightened or lost, they looked like they were waiting. And for reasons he couldn't define, he felt like they were waiting for him. He stepped closer. They were maybe 5, maybe 6. Both wore soft sweaters with faded stars printed on them, one pink, one blue. Their faces were serene, but as he stood there watching them, he felt his heart begin to pound in a slow, unfamiliar rhythm. He didn't believe in signs or fate. He believed in logic and data and decisions made with clear intention. But in that moment, every cell in his body told him this was not a coincidence. The driver had followed him inside. "Sir, I can call child services," he offered hesitantly. "Or maybe the school district, someone has to come for them." Oliver turned to him slowly. "No," he said. "Don't call anyone else yet. I'll handle it." The driver blinked. "You'll handle it?" "Yes," Oliver said, more firmly now. "They'll come with me." The driver didn't argue. There was something about Oliver's voice that made people listen. And without another word, Oliver reached down and gently touched the shoulder of the girl in pink. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and hazel brown, and stared up at him, confused but not afraid. The second girl stirred beside her, mirroring the movement with perfect synchronicity. They both sat up slowly, blinking in the sudden sunlight pouring through the bus windows. Oliver knelt down to their level. "Hi," he said gently, his voice softer than it had been in years. "I'm Oliver. Can you tell me your names?" The girls glanced at each other. One spoke first. "I'm Ella," she said. "And that's Emma." "Hi, Ella and Emma," he said with a faint smile. "Do you know where your mom is?" They both shook their heads. She had to work, Ella murmured. We got on the wrong bus. We were trying to go home, but we got sleepy. Oliver looked at them carefully. Do you know your address? Another headshake. Do you have her phone number? I don't remember it, Emma said quietly. Mom doesn't have a phone right now. Oliver straightened up slowly. His suit was wrinkled, his meeting long forgotten, and for the first time in years, he didn't care. He took out his phone, not to call the office, not to reschedule anything, but to make arrangements. Something about this had become his responsibility. Not because of guilt or image or headlines. But because in the middle of a traffic jam, two little girls had appeared like ghosts from a life he hadn't lived, and he couldn't let them go. Not now. Not ever. Oliver didn't return to the office that day. For the first time in over a decade, he let the rest of the world wait without explanation. Instead, he brought the girls to the quiet upper floor of his corporate building, a level typically reserved for private client meetings and executive retreats. It was peaceful, almost sterile, but he asked his assistant to bring in warm blankets, coloring books, and snacks, anything to make the room feel less like a conference suite and more like a place where two frightened children could feel safe. Ella and Emma followed him with surprising trust, their small hands in his, their wide eyes taking in everything without a word of protest. He could tell they were still unsure, maybe too exhausted to question why this man in a suit was helping them, but they didn't resist. And he didn't ask why they didn't. While they sat curled together on a couch with juice boxes and a plate of cookies in front of them, Oliver stepped out and closed the door behind him. His assistant, Rachel, stood waiting in the hallway, her tablet in hand and confusion all over her face. Sir, she said carefully, your 9 a.m., 11:30, and 1 o'clock have all been moved. But, do you want me to contact family services? He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the door again, where faint giggles were now coming through the glass. No, he finally said. Not yet. First, I want to know who they are. Rachel hesitated. You think you know them? I think their mother might be someone I used to know, he said. And if I'm right, I might be their father. Rachel blinked, speechless for the first time in their working relationship. But instead of questioning him further, she nodded and immediately started making discreet calls, tracking school enrollment records, transit camera footage, anything that could help identify where the girls had come from and who was missing them. Oliver, meanwhile, returned to the room, where the girls had now begun drawing pictures on the whiteboard using dry erase markers. He sat down across from them and watched as they colored side by side, so perfectly in sync it was like watching a mirrored version of the same soul. Do you live far from here? He asked gently. Emma nodded. We live in the pink building with the flower shop. In the South District, Ella added helpfully. Our neighbor Mrs. King helps Mom sometimes. He took mental notes of every detail, filing it away with the precision of a man used to absorbing data. But this wasn't just about gathering facts. This was about understanding them, these girls, their lives, and the enormous possibility that they were his children. The thought scared him, not because he wasn't ready for the answer, but because of how deeply he already wanted it to be true. By noon, Rachel had located their school. It was a public elementary just outside the Southern District, a 20-minute ride from where the bus had stopped. She also found a name. Sarah Watson. Oliver hadn't heard that name in 6 years, but the moment he did, it felt like a key clicking into place. He remembered everything. Her laugh, her calm confidence, the way she had looked at him like he was more than just a title. He also remembered how he had let her go without much of a fight. She hadn't tried to follow him. She'd simply disappeared. And now, it seemed, she had done so with more than her pride. She'd done it with 2 lives he hadn't known existed. Back in the lounge, the girls were curled up under blankets, fast asleep again, their heads resting together. Oliver sat in the armchair across from them, watching the steady rhythm of their breathing. They looked peaceful now. Trusting. And he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think before, if they were his, if this truly was his family, he didn't just want to help them. He wanted to be with them. He wanted to know their routines, their fears, their favorite bedtime stories. He wanted to be more than the man who found them. He wanted to be their father in every sense. And as he sat there, one hand on his knee, the other resting lightly on the back of the chair, he whispered to the empty air around him, "I won't walk away this time. Whatever it takes. I'll be there." By early evening, Oliver was standing in front of a weathered apartment complex on the south side of the city, a quiet, modest building tucked between a corner laundromat and a closed florist shop. He held a crumpled slip of paper in one hand. The address Rachel had confirmed belonged to Sarah Watson, the mother of Ella and Emma. He hadn't said much on the drive over, and even now, standing at the base of the stairs, he wasn't sure what he was going to say once she opened the door. It had been 6 years since he had last seen her. Their relationship hadn't ended in anger or betrayal, but in distance and misaligned priorities. He had chosen his career. She had quietly accepted that choice and walked away. He climbed the stairs slowly, his shoes echoing on the concrete steps, and paused at apartment 3B. The hallway smelled faintly of cooking oil and detergent. He could hear a TV faintly in one unit and the sound of someone vacuuming in another. He knocked twice, steady and firm, and took a step back. Moments passed. He heard shuffling behind the door, then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened only partway at first, a cautious chain still drawn across the frame. Sarah peeked through the gap. She looked almost exactly as he remembered her, though there was something new in her eyes, something more guarded, more tired. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore a faded sweatshirt over scrubs, likely just home from work. The moment her eyes met his, she froze. "Oliver," she said, her voice low and uncertain. He nodded. "Hi, Sarah." She didn't open the door any wider at first. "What are you doing here?" "I found Ella and Emma this morning," he said quietly. "They were asleep on a city bus. I recognized something. I had to find you." The door closed gently. For a second he thought she had shut him out. But then he heard the chain slide, and the door opened fully. Sarah stepped aside, letting him in without a word. The apartment was small but clean, with toys tucked into corners and a calendar full of notes pinned beside the fridge. He noticed 2 small jackets on the hooks by the door, matching shoes lined up neatly underneath. It was a home built around love and routine, not luxury. She led him to the kitchen table and sat across from him. He didn't sit right away, unsure if he even deserved to. "They're safe," he began. "They stayed with me most of the day. I didn't know what else to do. They didn't know their address, and they said you didn't have a phone. I didn't want to call anyone who might separate them from you." Sarah nodded slowly, still processing everything. "They weren't supposed to get on the bus alone. I usually walk them. But today, I got called in early. My neighbor helped, but I guess something got mixed up." She ran a hand through her hair, visibly shaken. "I was going crazy looking for them." "I'm sorry," Oliver said, and he meant it, not just for today, but for the 6 years that had led to this moment. "I didn't know about them. About any of it." Sarah looked up at him, and her expression softened just a little. "I tried to tell you once. I even wrote a letter. But I never sent it. I figured it was better not to complicate things." His voice broke slightly. "You should have told me. I would've. You were building a company, Oliver. You barely had time for me, let alone children. I didn't want to become someone's burden or interruption. I thought I was doing the right thing." For a long moment, they both sat in silence. Then he asked, "Can I be in their lives now?" Sarah studied him, not with anger but with caution. "They don't know who you are. I never spoke badly about you, but I didn't tell them either. I wanted to protect them from expectations I couldn't promise. But they liked you, didn't they? He nodded. We spent the day drawing. They made me promise to come back. She gave a small smile. They're good girls. They deserve someone who stays. I'm ready to stay, he said, finally sitting down across from her. For them. And if you'll let me, for you too. Sarah didn't respond right away. She looked at the clock, then toward the hallway where the girls would soon be coming home from her neighbors. When she looked back at him, her eyes were tired, but they weren't cold. Let's start with tomorrow, she said. You can pick them up from school. And in that quiet answer, Oliver felt something shift, like a door opening just enough to see the light on the other side. Oliver returned the next day just before the final school bell rang, waiting near the playground with a nervous energy he hadn't felt since his early 20s. He wore no suit today, just a soft button-down shirt and slacks, his sleeves rolled up and phone tucked deep in his pocket, untouched for hours. When the bell rang and a sea of children spilled out into the yard, it took him only seconds to find them. Ella and Emma came out hand in hand, their brown eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on him. The moment they saw him, they lit up with smiles that hit him straight in the chest. Emma ran first, arms stretched forward, with Ella only a second behind. He crouched and caught them both, one on each side, their small arms looping around his neck like they had done it 100 times before. You came, they chimed together, giggling in stereo. He stood slowly, holding their hands as they walked down the sidewalk toward the bakery across the street. It was a place Sarah had mentioned in passing, a spot the girls loved but rarely visited. They chose 2 pastries each, their eyes wide as Oliver told them they could pick anything they wanted. Inside the booth by the window, he watched them eat and chatter and interrupt each other, telling stories about classmates and pets they wished they had. He asked questions and listened, not pretending to be interested, but fully, deeply immersed. It didn't feel foreign or forced. It felt natural. Later, when they walked back to the apartment, the girls took turns holding his hands, and once or twice, he caught them exchanging a look between each other as if trying to figure out something silently. When they reached their front door, Sarah was already home from work. She opened the door before they even knocked, as if she'd been listening for their footsteps. Her eyes met Oliver's for a brief second, checking, not for drama, but for any sign that something had gone wrong. What she found instead was 2 happy, wind-blown girls with chocolate on their cheeks and joy in their voices. They had dinner together for the first time that evening. Sarah insisted on keeping it simple, spaghetti and salad, but the table felt full in a way it never had before. Oliver helped set the plates while the girls argued over who would grate the cheese. When they sat down, conversation flowed easily. The girls shared stories from school, and Oliver answered their endless questions about what a CEO actually did, whether he ever got bored in meetings, and if he had a dog when he was little. Sarah watched them quietly at first, still guarded, but eventually relaxed into the rhythm of their new normal. After the girls had gone to bed, Oliver stayed behind, helping Sarah wash dishes in the tiny kitchen. There wasn't much to clean, but neither of them seemed eager to end the moment. The silence between them was different now, not stiff, but reflective. They didn't stop smiling once, Sarah said, drying a plate. They're already attached. I am too, he replied, almost in a whisper. I didn't think it would happen this fast. But it did. She looked at him, her brow softening. They've been missing something for a long time. I think they were ready to find it. I want to be here, he said. Not just for dinner or school pickups. I want to be a real part of this. Sarah didn't answer right away. She rinsed her hands and leaned back against the counter, thinking. I still don't know what this looks like, she said honestly. I've been doing it alone for so long. I'm scared to hope. I'm not here to replace anything, he said. I just want to be present. To build something that lasts. She nodded, slowly. Let's see where it goes. When he finally left that night, the hallway felt less narrow, the air less heavy. Something had shifted again, not a full transformation, but a foundation quietly being laid beneath their feet. And as he walked to his car, Oliver looked up at the night sky, no longer checking his calendar or inbox, but replaying laughter and messy spaghetti sauce smiles in his mind. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't counting hours. He was learning how to count moments. The following week unfolded with surprising ease, as though the missing puzzle pieces of Oliver's life had quietly fallen into place without asking for permission. He began waking up earlier, not to review financial forecasts or rehearse speeches for board meetings, but to make sure he arrived at the apartment just in time to walk Ella and Emma to school. The girls greeted him each morning with boundless enthusiasm, their backpacks swinging from their shoulders, talking over one another as they reported every dream, every misplaced crayon, every minor injustice of the first grade. Sarah had started leaving the door unlocked when she was getting ready, and on some mornings, he would find a third coffee cup already set out for him, even if no one said anything about it. These subtle signals meant more to him than any signed contract ever had. He learned that Emma hated broccoli, that Ella could never sleep unless her stuffed elephant was nearby, and that both of them had an irrational fear of pigeons but an uncanny talent for reciting lines from animated movies. They began to include him in their world instinctively, as if he had always been there, asking him for help with laces, insisting he be the judge in their dance competitions in the living room, or pulling him by the hand to look at drawings they had taped onto the refrigerator. With every moment spent in their orbit, Oliver's sense of self deepened, reshaped not by who he had been but by who he was becoming. The transition from outsider to essential happened quietly, without fanfare, and perhaps that was why it felt so real. One afternoon, as he picked them up from school, the teacher approached him gently, smiling. "The girls talk about you all the time," she said. "They say their daddy is a boss who wears nice shoes and makes pancakes." He smiled at the comment, surprised by how warm and grounded it made him feel. In a life previously defined by headlines and financial milestones, he had never thought a child's casual description could feel more validating than any professional title. That evening, after dinner, as they were all sitting together on the floor building a city out of wooden blocks, Ella suddenly looked up and asked, "Where were you before you found us?" The question was simple, but it landed with weight. Oliver paused, carefully putting down the piece in his hand. Sarah, sitting nearby with a book in her lap, looked up as well, her eyes watchful but calm. He looked at both girls and said, "I was looking for something. I just didn't know it was you." Emma tilted her head, confused. "But how could you look for something if you didn't know it existed?" "Because sometimes," he said, "your heart knows what your mind doesn't understand yet." Neither girl replied, but they seemed satisfied, returning to their construction. Sarah, however, continued watching him with an unreadable expression. After the girls went to bed, she lingered in the kitchen while he helped clean up, and when they found themselves alone, she finally asked, "Did you mean that? What you told them?" He met her gaze. "Every word." "I didn't expect you to stay this long," she admitted. "I thought maybe it would fade, once the shock wore off." "I'm not here out of obligation," he said. "I'm here because I want to be. Because I can't imagine not being here now." They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking, until the quiet was broken by the hum of the dishwasher and the occasional sound of the girls whispering in their room. The stillness between them wasn't tense, it was full, charged with the understanding that things were changing, deepening, even if neither of them had yet spoken aloud what that might mean. That night, as he let himself out and the door clicked softly behind him, Oliver realized that this wasn't about mending a past mistake anymore. It was about building a present and a future where the foundation was made of time, trust, and presence. He had no script for this, no business plan or strategy. But for the first time in years, he didn't need one. All he had to do was keep showing up. And that, he now understood, was more than enough. On a rainy Thursday morning, Oliver arrived at the apartment to find the lights off and the door unanswered. At first, he thought he was simply early, but a bad feeling crept into his chest when he noticed the girls' lunchboxes still lined up on the counter through the window and Sarah's umbrella leaning by the door. He knocked again, this time harder, calling Sarah's name. No answer. His phone buzzed just as he was pulling it from his pocket. It was the building's doorman, who knew by now that Oliver came and went as if he lived there. "Mr. Harris, Miss Watson was taken to the hospital early this morning. One of the neighbors called an ambulance." Within minutes, Oliver was in his car, heart pounding as he raced across the city, windshield wipers thrashing against the downpour. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than he realized, and for the first time in years, he felt genuinely afraid, not in the way business deals could go wrong or stocks could plummet, but in the helpless, human way that someone he cared about might be hurt, and there was nothing he could do until he saw her. When he arrived at the hospital and reached the emergency department, he spotted a nurse behind the desk and blurted Sarah's name before the doors even closed behind him. They brought him to her room quickly. She was resting, her skin pale against the white sheets, a thin oxygen line at her nose. A nurse explained it had been a fainting spell, likely caused by exhaustion, low blood sugar, and stress. She hadn't eaten in over a day and had been pushing herself beyond her limits. As the nurse left, Oliver sat down beside her bed, unable to hide the tremble in his hands. He had known she worked long hours and rarely asked for help, but he hadn't realized how thinly stretched she had become. Watching her now, still and vulnerable, he felt a quiet fury rise, not at her, but at himself, for not seeing it sooner. Sarah stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. She looked disoriented at first, then focused on his face. "You're here," she said, voice hoarse. He nodded, leaning in. "Of course I am. You scared me." "I'm okay," she murmured, though her eyes looked too tired to convince anyone. "I just needed a break." "No," he said gently, "you need rest. And help. Real help. Not just dinners and pickups. You've been carrying this alone for too long." She didn't argue. She closed her eyes again, and he could tell it wasn't out of dismissal, but relief. He stayed with her for hours, speaking only when she wanted to, brushing her hair back when she couldn't get comfortable, holding her hand when she drifted in and out of sleep. During that time, he arranged everything else. The girls were picked up by a trusted assistant and brought to his apartment, where they would be safe and entertained. He called the school, explained enough without revealing too much, and made sure the fridge at Sarah's place was stocked by the evening. When she was discharged later that night, he refused to let her go back to her apartment alone. Instead, he brought her home with him, where the girls greeted her with cautious hugs and tearful smiles. Ella had drawn a picture of their family, which was now taped proudly to the fridge. Emma had made a "feel better" card with far too many glitter stickers. Sarah sat on the couch with them tucked under each arm, her head resting against Oliver's shoulder, and for the first time in days, she looked peaceful. Later, once the girls were asleep, Oliver brought her tea and sat beside her in the quiet living room. She looked around at the space, once sterile and silent, now scattered with toys and art and signs of life. "I didn't think I'd ever need someone again," she said softly. "I thought needing someone made me weak." He shook his head. "Needing someone doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. And it's okay to be tired." She looked at him, her eyes shining but not crying. "What if I forget how to not be alone?" "Then I'll remind you," he said. "As many times as it takes." That night, as she slept in the guest room while he stayed up in the kitchen organizing medication reminders and work schedules, Oliver realized just how much his life had changed. This wasn't charity or guilt or penance. This was commitment. This was choosing them, again and again, no matter what. And in that quiet, unremarkable moment, he knew that love wasn't something that happened all at once. It was something built day by day, with steady hands and open eyes, and the courage to keep showing up even when it was hard. The days following Sarah's hospital visit settled into a rhythm that felt new but strangely right, as if the missing pieces of their lives had quietly shifted into place. Sarah stayed at Oliver's apartment while she recovered, her presence softening the once sterile space that had been defined by sharp lines, polished surfaces, and silence. Now the dining table was cluttered with crayons and flashcards, the couch had throw blankets folded in haphazard corners, and tiny shoes were always somewhere near the door. Oliver, who once measured time by the pace of global markets, now marked his days by breakfast giggles, school drop-offs, and bedtime rituals filled with questions, storybooks, and warm goodnight hugs. He had made a choice, conscious and unwavering, not to go back to how things were before. He delegated more responsibilities at the company, turned down meetings he once would have flown across the world for, and started his mornings not with headlines, but with two girls who now considered him the center of their universe. Ella had begun calling him Dad without hesitation, her voice bright and confident. Emma was quieter about it, but one night as he tucked her in, she whispered, "I'm glad you found us," and it stayed with him longer than any boardroom praise ever had. Sarah, too, had begun to let go of the invisible armor she'd worn for so long. In quiet moments, she'd admit things she hadn't told anyone in years, how hard it had been to be alone in the early months after giving birth, how much guilt she carried for not telling Oliver, how many nights she had sat up watching the girls sleep, wondering if she'd made the right choices. Oliver never judged her. He listened, offered comfort when she needed it, and space when she didn't. They didn't define what was happening between them, but there was an undeniable closeness, a growing intimacy rooted not in old romance but in shared responsibility and trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the city outside buzzed with distant sounds, they found themselves sitting on the balcony after the girls had gone to bed. Sarah wrapped in a blanket, Oliver with 2 mugs of tea. She looked over at him and said, not quite casually, "I don't know how to go back to the way things were. Even if I wanted to." He didn't respond right away. He watched the lights flicker in the distance and finally turned to her. "Maybe we're not supposed to go back. Maybe we just keep going forward." She nodded, then looked down at the mug in her hands. "Do you ever resent me for not telling you sooner?" He thought about it. He had asked himself that question 100 times in the past weeks. "No," he said. "I regret not being there. I regret all the moments I missed. But I don't resent you. You did what you thought was best. And maybe if you had told me back then, I wouldn't have been ready." Sarah's shoulders dropped slightly, as if something heavy had eased. "They adore you, you know," she said with a soft smile. "You're already their hero." "I don't want to be a hero," he said. "I just want to be theirs. Every day. No matter what." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of things neither of them needed to say aloud. There was still uncertainty between them, and grief over the years lost, but it no longer held them apart. It simply reminded them how much they had to protect now that they had found one another again. Later that night, as Oliver checked on the girls, finding them tangled in blankets and each other's arms, he stood quietly by the doorway, marveling at the improbable turns that had brought them here. For so long, he had believed love came with conditions, and that family was something defined by structure, not emotion. But now, in the quiet of this transformed apartment, he saw everything differently. Love was the willingness to stay, to change, to choose each other, even when it's hard, even when it's late. And in choosing them, he had finally come home. Months passed, and what once felt like disruption had now become a rhythm. The apartment that had started as a quiet refuge for recovery was now home. Not in a symbolic way, not in the temporary sense that comes with shared space, but in the rooted, lived-in way that builds slowly and honestly. The sharp edges of Oliver's life, the tight schedules, the cold routines, the endless pursuit of more, had softened, replaced by laughter spilling from the girls' room, art projects taped to the walls, and Saturday mornings spent curled up on the couch with pancakes and cartoons. His calendar no longer dictated his worth. His days were built around the people he had almost lost before ever knowing them. It was a Sunday afternoon in late spring, one of those golden, breeze-soft days when the world feels suspended in a moment of peace. Sarah had taken the girls to the park while Oliver prepped lunch at home. He had never learned to cook much beyond toast and espresso in his former life, but now he could make grilled cheese sandwiches that were uneven but beloved, fruit bowls with more color than symmetry, and a salad that Sarah pretended to like no matter how uneven the dressing. As he chopped quietly in the kitchen, he heard the front door open. A moment later, twin voices bounced through the hall. "We found the best tree," Ella called, dropping her shoes by the door. "It had a squirrel in it," Emma added, already pulling off her light jacket and rushing into the kitchen. Oliver turned and knelt, catching her mid-run. She hugged him hard, face pressed into his shoulder as if it had only been hours, not minutes, since they last saw each other. Ella appeared beside her, slipping into the hug too, and for a few seconds he held them both, their tiny arms looped around his neck, their sun-warmed hair brushing against his face. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching with a smile that was quieter but no less full of light. Later, after lunch, the girls settled into the living room with puzzles, and Oliver and Sarah sat on the balcony, 2 cups of tea between them, their knees nearly touching. They talked about school enrollment, summer plans, the idea of getting a dog, and then, without planning to, they fell into a deeper stillness. Sarah looked out across the skyline, then down at her cup, and finally said, "I don't think I ever thanked you. For staying. For all of it." Oliver reached over, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to thank me. This is where I was meant to be. I just didn't know it in time." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the motion natural now, easy. "I used to feel like I had to hold the world up alone. Now, I don't." He turned to kiss the top of her head, a gesture born not from impulse but from knowing. "We're holding it together now," he said. "All of us." As dusk crept in, they gathered the girls and went for a walk. The 4 of them moved through the neighborhood like a family that had always existed, even if it had taken time and unexpected detours to form. They stopped at the corner shop for ice cream, sat on a bench under the blooming trees, and listened to Emma try to invent a new language while Ella insisted she could speak squirrel. Sarah laughed so hard at one point she had to wipe tears from her eyes, and Oliver, watching them, hearing them, feeling every bit of it, realized this wasn't just happiness. It was something deeper. It was healing. That night, after bedtime stories and 3 rounds of kisses and water refills, he and Sarah stood in the hallway outside the girls' room. The lights were dim. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of a lullaby playing in the background. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever think about how easily we could have missed all of this?" He nodded, emotion tightening his chest. "Every day. But I think about it less now. Because we didn't." And with that, they turned out the lights, closed the door gently behind them, and walked back into the living room, their living room, ready for whatever came next. Not as people trying to fix what was broken, but as a family who had chosen to rebuild something stronger from the start. What makes the ending of this story resonate so deeply is its quiet truth: love and family aren't built in dramatic gestures, but in small, consistent choices, showing up, staying, listening, and choosing one another again and again. Oliver's transformation doesn't erase his past mistakes, but it proves that people can change when they are willing to be honest, present, and vulnerable. The beauty of this ending is that it doesn't pretend life is perfect, it's messy, unexpected, and full of uncertainty, but it shows how healing can begin the moment we stop running from connection and start building it, piece by piece. It's not just a story of redemption. It's a story of becoming, slowly, bravely, and together.